So next we have Kim Brown. She grew up on a mixed farm in southwest Manitoba and was raised on 4-H and curling, cultivating a lifelong love of all things farming. After high school, she attended the U of M, first for an agronomy degree and then a master's degree in soil science, jointly with Ag Canada in Brandon. Over the past 30 years, she has been fortunate to have been with Ag Canada as a research associate, Manitoba Agriculture as a weed specialist and ag rep, MASC as both an adjuster and an insurance agent, and in industry as a regional agronomist. Kim returned to Manitoba Agriculture in 2021 as the provincial weed specialist, where she is involved in training and extension of new and existing weed issues. So please join me in welcoming Kim.
Can you guys hear me okay? Okay. I apologize a bit for my title. I was actually listening to a podcast, The War on Weeds, which is a great podcast. You guys should listen to it. They have, I think, 150 episodes, and I think I was supposed to use a different title, but I used that one because it was good, and I had it in my brain. So anyways, talking about the war on weeds. Can you advance my slide while we're trying to get the clicker back from Scott? Oh, perfect. Okay, so we're going to talk about resistance and just talking about how herbicide resistance starts. And no matter what, this is how we start. In every population of plants in a field, whether it's weeds or whether it's a crop that we've bred, even though you think a lot of them are the same, they are not. There's going to be 1 or 2 out there in a million plants on an acre that are just different. And for some reason, they just are. That's just what happens. And so when we start off with the population, we have these resistant individuals will be in the dark green here. And when we have really good products that work really well to kill this weed, other than what's resistant, over time, we end up in the middle, where all of a sudden we're killing off the weeds, and the other ones end up being, the resistant weeds end up increasing, and then finally when you get to the end, you've got way more of the dark ones, which are the resistant populations, and that's just, at the end of the day, it's just math. Okay, so there's a couple of different sites of resistance. So today I'm going to talk to you about resistance. I'm going to talk to you about testing. I'm always going to talk about resistance. So target site resistance is really simply, it's where a mutation is in the weed. It blocks the target site. That is where the herbicide is supposed to kill that weed, and it stops that herbicide from working. So the weed just kind of figures out a way around it. So sometimes, you know, when you're driving down a gravel road and there's those like blockades up that say, you know, road closed, don't drive, you know, you can't drive, but you know, you see all the lines in the ditch where people just go around that, and you go around one side or the other, because you know, you're just going half a mile down the road, you're just going around it. And that's basically what a weed does. There's something there that was supposed to block it, and they just figure out a way to go around. And so generally this affects other herbicides with the same site of action or same mode of action. Sometimes you see mode of action, sometimes you see site of action. It's about the same thing. It can be managed by rotating to other herbicides with different sites of action, as long as those still work. So this one, the other one though, is non-target site resistance. This is kind of the really scary one. This is where a weed will just rapidly metabolize or store or detoxify the herbicide. The most common is metabolic resistance, but there's lots of different ways that weeds can do this, and this is not limited to a herbicide group. So this one is kind of scary. So for example, if a plant can metabolize group 2 herbicides, it could also just be able to metabolize group 1 and group 27 and group 4. It just does that. So rotating herbicide groups does not work for NTSR. So you'll see this a few times. I abbreviated NTSR versus TSR. It's much less predictable. In fact, sometimes it's not predictable at all. And it is increasing, especially in broadleaf weeds like waterhemp and farmer amaranth. So this is a site of the number of sites of action or modes of action with the years across the bottom, and you can see in here, sorry, the pointer is not very good, but we started using herbicides in agriculture basically by the end of World War II with MCPA and 2,4-D, and those have basically remained unchanged since we've started using them over 80 years ago. And we had, you know, lots of herbicide groups over the years. This is atrazine and metribuzin. There's edge and treflan in there. Our group 1s are graminicides like axial, and those are in that group. That was back here. and our group 2s are in the 1980s. But if you see this line right here, we really have not had a new usable group that we can use in about the last 40 years, since about the mid-1980s. There is a group out here, this group 28, there are products in that group, but those are mostly rice herbicides right now, so no matter how wet we get, we're probably not using those in Manitoba. And there may be some new things coming. There is a new group 12, some new products out of group 12 that we may see fairly soon. I'm talking 3-4 years, hopefully. Group 12 is not a new group, but it is to us, so that might be good. And Bayer does have something promising that could be coming, I would think, within 5 years. So there might be 1 or 2 new things coming, but there's not a lot, and they aren't here for a while. So we basically are using the same products that we've been using for the last 40 years. We're using different, within these groups, there's different families. So there is a lot of different products in here, and we do see lots of new products and lots of new recombination of things. But at the end of the day, it's same old, same old. We are just recycling exactly the same things that we've been using since my dad started using herbicides in the 1960s when he started farming on his own. So talking about herbicide resistance, because I'm always going to talk about resistance, basically Bad News Brown is in the building, and it just gets worse. Yeah, quick story, it just gets worse. So we do these resistance surveys all across Western Canada. You can see the survey sites. We actually do a big survey, an abundance survey, to talk about what weeds we find, and then we come back at harvest time. We actually gather the weed seeds. There's some of you in the audience that have done some of the surveying for me, and I thank you very much for that. We're doing it again this summer, so coming soon to a field near you. You'll probably see some of us out there. And but for a subset of the fields, we go back and we actually gather the weed seeds, the weeds that we can find. We gather the seeds, and we basically send them away for herbicide resistance testing. So overall, in the 3 prairie provinces, Manitoba gets done, Saskatchewan takes a couple of years to do because they're so big, Alberta gets done, we wait a year, and then we start the whole thing all over again. And so that data ends up over here, where basically overall about 72% of the fields in Saskatchewan and Manitoba have at least 1 herbicide-resistant weed in them. And Alberta's a little bit far behind, but you can see from these lines that since we started doing the survey in this form, we've been able to do this survey for the last 20 years, basically identical survey year after year after year, and so that way we can compare the data, and these numbers, these lines just go up and up and up. They're kind of tapering off of it, but they are still going up. So we still have herbicide resistance. Once you have that on farm, it doesn't go away. And so the herbicide-resistant weeds are estimated to cost prairie farmers about $658 million annually, and that's either lost yield or increased herbicide costs, things like that. So this table, first of all, I want to point out, this is from a site called Prairie Weed Monitoring Network. That is a really, really great website. It's fairly new, so there's not a lot of stuff on there yet, but it will get very good. There is also, though, Prairie Insect Monitoring Network and Prairie Disease Monitoring Network, and those networks house a lot of material, a lot of information. So if you guys are looking for information, this is here. The weed surveys are stored there, so you can download the weed surveys if you want to get some really specific information on that. And so anyways, this is just some information. And I also did I brought a bunch of these. There's a table at the back. Anybody who's signing in for CCA credits, I brought some of this. I brought some stuff on the weed survey, the resistance survey, some pigweed stuff. There's a bunch of handouts back there. If you want anything, just take it. I'll just leave them there for the next couple of days. But this just talks about all the different herbicide-resistant weeds that we've found so far in Western Canada. And so you can see here's group 5, that's atrazine and metribuzin, and Sencor. There's our group 14, that's things like AIM, Heat, Baraxer, Authority, Volterra. Here's group 9, that's glyphosate. So far we have kochia, downy brome, and waterhemp that are resistant. Here's group 1, so of course we know we have the 2 foxtails, green and yellow. We have wild oat, we have foxtail barley as well. This big group in here, that's group 2s, and that group just gets bigger and bigger every year. We have both grasses and broadleaf weeds in there, but there is a lot of group 2 resistance out in the landscape. And then there's group 3 resistance. We have green foxtail. We also unofficially have some pigweed conformations, just red root pigweed conformations in Manitoba. And despite the fact that we have had group 4s on the landscape for over 80 years and basically using some of those products unchanged, we actually don't have a lot of resistance to that group, which is really good. And the reason we don't have the resistance is because the way it works to kill the weeds is quite complex. In fact, it's just recently been understood. Even though we've been using these products for 80 years, we still didn't really know how they worked until the last number of years. and didn't know exactly how they worked. And that's a really good thing, because we actually are becoming heavily reliant on some of our group 4s for some of the weed issues that I'm going to talk about today. So that's a good thing. And when it's more complicated to kill the weed, it's very much more complicated for the weeds to get around that. If a lot of these, like especially this group 2, group 9, that is a single site of action. It is pretty easy for that weed to see that roadblock and just zip around and figure out a way to get around it. So back to the basics. Okay, what weeds are on your farm and what's coming? Do you have herbicide-resistant weeds? Are they multiple herbicide resistant? If you do not know what's on your land, how do you know what product you're going to be picking to go after those weeds? Because you could have a real mess on your hands if you have herbicide-resistant weeds and don't know about them. There's a lot of different ways we can do this. We ultimately are going to be using herbicides. That's still the main way we're going after weeds. What herbicides are effective against the weeds that are there. So you need to know what's there, know what resistance issues you're dealing with, how and where can I use them. There's a lot of different places. There's burn-off, there's pre-emerge with residual, there's post-emerge, may have residual, there's pre-harvest, that's usually good for some of our perennial weeds. Post-harvest, you need to wait for regrowth on perennials, for our winter annuals, and also some annuals that can still set seed before freeze up. And in particular, I'm talking about the pigweeds here. But at the end of the day, we need to get better at our integrated weed management. There's an awful lot of other things that we could be doing better. We're still using herbicides. They're still working for the most part. We still have ways to use them so that they do continue to work, but we know we have to start doing some different things. So this is basically contemporary weed management. This is one of Charles Geddes' slides. I use a lot of Ag Canada slides between Charles and Brianne and Sean. I don't create anything on my own. I do extensions, so I use a lot of their work. They do some really, really good work. And so this is contemporary weed management. Basically, really what we're doing is chemical. I mean, and we are doing good things. We're doing herbicide mixtures, we're doing herbicide rotation, we're layering our herbicides, but at the end of the day, bulk of our weed control is done with chemical weed management, and probably just a little bit down here. Really, if we were looking at integrated weed management, we'd be looking at chemical, at physical, at biological, and these cultural things down here, these are relatively easier. They're easier to do, and sometimes they don't cost any more money, which is really good things, especially in the economy that we're the crop year that's coming up. And this is things from equipment sanitation, using cover crops if and when possible. We don't have really big shoulder seasons here in Manitoba, but we can, the cover crops can work sometimes, possibly using mulches, manipulating seeding dates, sometimes super early, sometimes super late. If you wait a little bit, in the old days to go after wild oats, my dad and granddad used to delay seeding, used to do a bunch of tillage. They didn't have herbicides back then. And then you seeded, and then the crop would come up quickly, get ahead of the wild oats, and that's how you dealt with wild oats. Using the most competitive cultivar you can, taking a crop for silage if there is a weed issue and you have a use for silage, making sure those weed seeds don't hit the ground, manipulating row spacing. Generally, narrower rows are much more competitive. They close in better, they cover the ground, and they can choke out weeds and stop things from germinating. Manipulating seeding rates, as many plants as you can get out there for that crop to grow. More plants are more competitive. What about crop life cycle diversity? Most of the crops we grow are spring annual crops. Sometimes we grow winter annual crops like winter wheat and fall rye, but if you could put a short-lived perennial in there as well, that's a really good thing to do. And then fertilizer and seed placement, especially something like pigweeds, they will just mop up all the nitrogen that you broadcast on the surface. Green foxtail will do the same thing, so there's things there that you can play with. But because we are mostly doing herbicides, we're all doing herbicides anyways, we might be doing some of those other things, and we've got to try doing a better job. Really, you need to go to your guide to crop protection. This is mine. And so there's a couple of places to look when you're first looking. I would encourage everybody to have a hard copy of this. The new one will be out hopefully first week in March, by middle of March for sure. You can pick them up at the 10 service centers that are in Manitoba, around Manitoba, where you do your crop insurance. And so they'll have guides. You can contact me, and our staff will get guides out to you if you can't get into a service center to get them. They're still $10 for next year. And so this is our burn-off tables, table 16A, there's table, sorry, I'll go back. Table 16A, and so say I've just picked soybeans, our crops are along the top, here's some products. Some of these products have a residual component, so they'll be in this table and they'll be elsewhere in the guide. I'll show you that in a minute. And so say I picked soybeans, I go down that row, anything with a check mark is registered, I go to table 16B. Now I took a look at that product and say, okay, well, what weeds does it get? And so you can see some of these products that I've picked for soybeans. That's our burn-off table. That's our first line of defense. Our first line of chemical defense against the weeds is our burn-off products. And then when you go to the crop tables, what I did a couple of years ago is I separated the tables into pre-emerge, so this capital PRE, that's we mean pre-emerge with residual, and then this is post-emergent, and some of these may have a residual component, usually maybe not season long, but there's some residual to some products, things like Everest and Sierra, things like that, and some may be used pre or post because they make something like in corn, you can use atrazine both ways, you can use dicamba both ways, and so you might see it in both. But basically, these are the products that you want to put on pre. Here is the page number where you can find the product. There's our herbicide resistance grouping. So when we're talking about all those resistance grouping, look, we're heavily into the 14s, the 15s, the 3s, a little bit of 5 in there, not a lot of groups to choose from. And then once we're starting to look at our post-emergent, there's a lot of 1s and 2s and 4s, not a lot of other groups in there. And so when you're talking about herbicide rotation, hopefully that can help you. But it just shows you there are a lot to choose from. There's a lot of different things we can do when we start playing in this space when we're talking about using pre-emerge with residual to go after some of those weeds. So there's a couple of ways to test for resistance. There's a traditional way, basically you gather some seed. This is what we do with our resistance survey. You grow it out and you spray it with all the stuff that's supposed to kill it. And if it doesn't die, it's resistant. It must be viable seed, so normally at or near the crop harvest, but for some weeds like kochia and Russian thistle, we've got to come in quite a bit later. It's really difficult to get kochia seed until a little bit later in the year. This will work for both target site resistance and non-target site types of resistance, but it's time consuming. You gather the seed in the fall, you send it to a lab, they grow it out over the winter, you're going to get the results in the spring, hopefully. And that will help you make decisions for next year, but you know, it's not super fast. There's also molecular detection, and this is also, you'll hear this called by a number of names. It's also known as a bioassay, DNA test, rapid test, quick test. It's just a really quick way to test stuff. You need living green material, so the plant has to be alive. And they're very specific tests, and they will test for a very specific mutation. And so sometimes the weeds are resistant but not to that mutation, and you will get an answer back that says it's still susceptible, and it's not. I see this quite often with my waterhemp samples that I send away. I get back a lot of times that they are, the test that's done says glyphosate still works, and I know damn well that glyphosate did not work on that weed. That's why I've sent the seed away for testing. That's why I've sent it away for testing, because it was sprayed with glyphosate twice and it was this tall. So these tests are very specific. They are very good though. They're usually a little bit cheaper than the traditional tests. The results can come quite quickly. So if you still might be able to make a decision based on the answers of that test as to what you could use in that field later on. You only need a very small amount of material. Usually it's just a few leaves. The fresh material, the youngest leaves are better. They've got the freshest DNA, but this will not pick up non-target site resistance. And again, it's very specific to the target site resistance. The test is specific to that type of mutation, and that's it. So where can you send some samples away? There are other labs out there. I'm just going to tell you about a few that I know of that I've had good success with. AgQuest 2020, the Saskatchewan Crop Protection Lab, and Turnkey Genomics. They'll either do traditional, molecular, or both. This is from AgQuest. This is just right off their webpage. So their webpage is right here. You can just Google AgQuest. And so they talk about resistance testing, and basically here, if you download here, there's a brochure that tells you how to gather the seed, how much they want, how they want it shipped to them. They're very specific on that. So make sure if you're going to, talk to them about what you want, it'll tell you what they're testing for. You need to obviously tell them what they're going to be spraying to try to kill the plants to see whether you have resistance. And again, there's a phone number, there's a contact number there. AgQuest was also very kind enough to provide me with a couple of resistant test results. So this is what you would get back from AgQuest. And so in this case, we were testing kochia. They tested carfentrazone, that's AIM, saprophenicil, that's heat, fluroxypyr, that's in a lot of stuff. Dicamba, well, that's dicamba. And so down here, basically they said whatever sample this was, it was not resistant to carfentrazone, not resistant to saprophenicil, not resistant to fluroxypyr, but it is resistant to dicamba, and it says 35% resistant seed. So that tells me I have, a concern with dicamba. That particular seed that was sent is definitely resistant. Was that a good sample? Is that indicative of the whole field? That tells me that I have to be careful with dicamba. I still obviously can use dicamba. I need to be using it with other products that are still going to work to pick up those ones that dicamba is going to miss. And so then here's another one. This one's wild oats. And so they tested phenoxyprop, that's Puma, pinoxidine is Axio, fluorcarbazone is Sierra Everest, pyroxylam is Simplicity, trialate, that's Avadex. And down here, this one isn't really very nice because it is resistant to phenoxyprop 93%. It is 76% resistant to pinoxidine, 100% resistant to Everest, or in the Sierra, 100% resistant to pyroxylam, and only 13% resistant to trialate. So this guy should have been using Avadex a little sooner than this, but Avadex still works. You still will be using these products because those aren't 100% resistance, and again, there are no post-emergent options for wild oats. So other than group 1 and group 2, but basically you've covered off the group 1s and group 2s there, and they're not working so good. So there's obviously a real problem with wild oats in this field, but again, it's not. There's other wild oats in there. It's maybe sample again, try to get some seed that sheds earlier, sheds later, that type of thing. But yeah, this one's not so pretty. So this is 2020 Seed Labs, and so this is just off their website, which again is right up here. And there's a weed, so they do both types of testing. So they do where the grow outs, so they need the seed, so it tells you here up to 2,000 seeds, tells you how to store them, there's a submission form. They also do the quick tests as well, so they'll do both. So again, talk to them, find out what you want, because those are two very different tests. So they've just started doing this plant bioassay and this molecular testing as of last year. So talk to them about that. This is Saskatchewan Crop Protection Lab, and there's Summers on here. It actually tells you how to. There's a form you can download and that type of thing. Oh, right there in yellow. Sorry. Download the herbicide resistance form, and it tells you how to get the sample to them and that type of thing. But this is again, you get the seed. This is the traditional testing where you get the seed, and they'll grow it out and spray it with the things that are supposed to kill it. They again mostly want minimum 2,000 seeds. Turnkey Genomics is where I send my water hemp samples to, and my common and giant ragweed samples to as well. They do molecular testing, so they'll tell me the DNA analysis, so I know which pigweed species I have for sure, and then they also will tell me they can test for 3 or 4 different herbicide groups right now. So we're doing testing on that. And not all the herbicide groups have a molecular test. Something like a group 4 doesn't have a test yet. So molecular testing is great, but it's only one tool that we're going to be using. This is actually not, you can't send samples here for testing, but there is some really good resources at this, weedscience.org. This is our Wild Oat Resistance Committee, Wild Oat Action Resistance Committee, I think it is. Anyways, and so you get to this website and there's a bunch of information on there, and if it talks about it, tells you how to gather wild oat seeds. I actually use an insect net, so John Gablowski would be proud of me. I'm not using it to sweep insects, but I could if I wanted to. But I usually would have an insect net with me, like a sweep net with me. And this is probably the easiest way to gather wild oat seeds, and 4 or 5 days before the combines hit the field, for me, is about the best time to get wild oat seeds. There is still a lot on the ground, but there's enough to harvest. And it just talks to you how, there's some really good infographics there. There's a ton of information there on resistant wild oats, so that is a really good site to visit. So herbicide-resistant weeds in the West: wild oats, kochia, downy brome, water hemp, and Palmer amaranth. Coming soon, what I think is our next bad news story is Canada fleabane. Based on the size of the font and how bold the text is where I think our issues are. They're all a problem, but kochia obviously is front and center because it's a right now problem. And so I'm just going to quickly go through kochia and talk about some kochia, talk about some issues here. In our last weed survey, it was number 12 in the province. It ranked in abundance across the province. And so talking about, this is the history of the first confirmations for herbicide-resistant kochia. And so kochia basically has been resistant to some of the group 5s for a very long time. Group 2s, they came out in the early 1980s, and because it's a single site of action with a group 2, there's 4 different families within the group 2s, so they're all quite different, but they're still the same site of action. And it worked really, really well. And the better it works, actually, the faster the weeds can adapt resistance to it, because it does a really good job at killing off all the non-resistant ones. and then you get stuck with just resistant ones very quickly. So their group 2s came out in the early 1980s, and usually within a couple of years we started to see resistance to group 2s, and so it was 87 and 88, basically since I was in high school. Group 2s really have not been doing a very good job on kochia. In fact, they're not working at all, and I would really, we're starting to see more and more group 2 resistance, again, in tons of weeds, tons of broadleaf weeds and grass weeds as well. We do have some group 4 resistance, but back in the day, this is more dicamba and fluroxapyr. We know we have rising group 4 resistance. I'm hoping it's still fairly small at this point. I think it seems to be growing fairly slowly, but we don't have a lot of good numbers on that for Manitoba. We will have as of this fall, once I get the resistance sampling done in October then, and get those results. So hopefully by next year we'll have some results. Probably not in time for Ag Days, because again, you have to grow out the weeds and spray them all, but still we will have results about a year after the survey, so we'll have a better handle on that one. And then group 9, this is glyphosate, of course. So back in 2007 in Kansas is when we first saw glyphosate-resistant kochia. 2011 in Alberta here, that was, and shortly after in Manitoba and Saskatchewan. PPO inhibitors, though, this is the ugly one. So this is group 14. So PPO inhibitors, that is your AIM, that's your HEAT, that's your Authority, that's your Volterra. There's lots of different group 14s. And up until now, they've been doing a really good job. This is growing, and it is unfortunately growing really fast. So this is, again, I talk a lot about Charles Geddes' work, and so this is Charles Geddes here. Where is that? That's, oh, sorry, right there. Charles Geddes. Joe Eichele, I work with Joe quite a bit. He's a professor at North Dakota State University. He's coming up to Manitoba next week to do some teaching to do a guest lecture at a course I'm teaching in Winnipeg. And so this is basically the path, or where we think that the PPO inhibitor or the group 14 resistant kochia could be, which is kind of, a lot of places. And so we actually did a little bit of surveying this summer. It's not a proper survey in that it's not a randomized survey where we're picking certain fields like we do with the regular weed survey. We pick fields based on eco-district, and then in each RM based on cropping intensity. It's very scientific how we pick the fields, and we can take that data and extrapolate that properly so that we know we can, with a fair amount of confidence say, okay, well, this is what we found in our survey, but this is what it means province-wide. So these surveys that I'm going to show you in a bit, we actually were going and picking fields. So some of the fields that we thought might have a problem with resistant kochia, group 14 resistant kochia, we're picking fields where koshia's always been an issue and just cannot seem to get rid of it, whether or not we think it's group 14 resistant or not. And so looking at how they do some of this group 14 resistance, this is carfentrazone here in the bottom, this is saflufenicil, that's HEAT. So you see here there's R1, S1, and S2, same thing up here, R1, S1, S2. This is at a Charles Geddes' lab in Lethbridge, and so they have two susceptible populations, that's what the S stands for. There's a resistant population right here, and somewhere in here is the field rate of AIM, so this is AIM. So even on susceptible populations far less than field rate, this is a grams active ingredient per hectare, because it's Ag Canada, they have to do it that way. But basically our field rate is somewhere in here, and you can see on susceptible populations we are still killing kochia. On a resistant population, not so much. This is a 3x rate, still not dying. There's still even some green growth way out here, and that's on a 10x rate. Up here with saflufenicil, same thing, two susceptible populations. Here's one, here's two, and there's a resistant one, and we're somewhere in here on a field rate. And you can see on these susceptible populations, even at far less than field rate, HEAT is a really good product, and it is working really, really well. But once you start getting resistant to that molecule, it doesn't work well at all. You're looking at a 3x rate and higher, and still getting some growth. So that's what resistance starts to look like. It's 2 and 3 and 10x rates are not killing these weeds. And so overall, this is just the graphs to show. This red graph just means that it is really, really resistant. These are the susceptible populations. This is how much saflufenicil it takes to kill them, and this is how much it takes to kill the resistant ones, which in some cases is an impossible amount. This is the graph, actually Jeanette showed this morning as well. This is Charles's work. So this is the group 14 study I did this summer with Kosha. So this is, again, me distributing some of the packages out to farmers, or I did a lot of it myself. But again, we were going into suspect fields, so it's not a true random survey. We may be overestimating somewhat, I don't know. But you can see there's a pile of group 14 resistance here in Alberta. There's a pile here all through Saskatchewan, and it seems to be nicely evenly distributed. And in Manitoba, of course, where we know we've got some real kochia issues, well, it's across the whole province now. But here in western Manitoba, here in the extreme southwest, and then we've got some spots just north of Winnipeg. So we were finding that, and not sure if it's on here. And so there's North Dakota. There is their group 14 resistant kochia. So it's pretty much statewide. That's as of last year, and we were finding, I'm not sure if I have that slide in, they found 38 out of 53 counties, so that's a lot, and we were finding, I think it was about 30%, so roughly 30% of the samples we sent in were group 14 resistant. There's 3 different mutation sites, and one is much more common than the other, but it doesn't matter really. They have to test it because there is 3 different mutation sites, but it is there. So the conclusions, yeah, so now kochia is exhibiting resistance to up to 5 different herbicide sites of actions or modes of actions. It's evolved very, very quickly since its first confirmation in 2021. And 28% of the fields have this particular substitution. And again, this is just some of the genetics behind it. There's different substitutions in there, but 28% of the fields tested have that. There are limited herbicide options once this starts to happen, and integrated weed management is critical and absolutely necessary. And the last time we did a full-blown kochia survey was a while ago. Charles went back and tested that seed to see if that is one good thing. When you're testing seed, you can keep that seed and then grow it again and spray more stuff on it. So when you're doing traditional weed testing, weed resistance testing, that's a good thing. Grew it all out, and even as short as 5 or so years ago, the kochia seeds that we had gathered were not resistant to group 14. So this has come on fairly quickly. It wasn't that it was there and we weren't testing for it, so we didn't know. It wasn't there, but in a way that's really not a good thing, because it has come on pretty quickly, and it's coming pretty hard. So for kochia control or suppression, basically assume all kochia in Manitoba is group 9 or glyphosate resistant. If glyphosate still works, man, you are very, very lucky, but it will not work for long, and we should never be spraying glyphosate by itself. It's always got to have a tank mix partner in there. What can we use? Group 3 Edge, where you can use it. Group 4 dicamba, fluroxapyr 2,4-D. I have a question mark there. That's not a product that I would have normally said to go after kochia with. But in the Enlist system, or the E3 system, it's a 12-ounce rate. It's a big rate, and you can tank mix it with some other things, and you can do a good job on some small kochia. Don't have the residual that you have with dicamba, but it can do a really good job on that kochia, but you have to manage your expectations. I have a slide on that right away. Anyways, Group 6 is Partner, which is bromoxyl and other products are tough. Group 10 is Liberty. Group 14, these are just some of the products: Authority, Heat, Blackhawk, Brax, or Insight. Group 27, these are our wheat products in here: Infinity, On Deck, and Talnor. That's a 27-6 combination. Group 27, Group 6 combination. That's for those. That's a great product. In corn, we're using Lotus, Armazon or Impact, Callisto. You also will get suppression out of your group 15, so that's Zidua, which is peroxysulfone, that's in Fierce and Focus and Authority Supreme and Braxer Complete and a whole bunch of other things. I really like that product, and I really think that we're going to have to start looking at where we can use that Zidua. You can get season-long control or suppression of a few weeds with that. It's a really nice product, and I would encourage you to talk to BSF about where and if you can be using Zidua. But we have growing group 4 resistance. We know we're slowly losing dicamba and fluroxapyr, and group 14 resistance has been reported, and well, it's been reported in North Dakota, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba now too. So if we lost those, we would have Edge. That's a pre-emerge, so that's not an in-crop, and only obviously on certain crops. We have 2 contact herbicides. So kochia is a hard weed to spray with a contact herbicide. You can do a good job, but that kochia has to be really little. You have to get really good coverage. You have to do a really good job. And so we've got Partner, we've got Liberty, and then we've got our Group 27s. So we are heavily reliant on this group now, and to some extent this Group 15, because we just don't have a lot of products left. This is from Charles Geddes. So this is where he's got, this is the mode of action. There's your crops up top. Some of the crops I haven't talked about. I don't really talk much about durum, but there's corn, canola, mustard, flax, soybean, field pea, lentils. Here's your soil applied herbicides. That's Edge. There's Fortress. That's that Zidua in there. The S, the yellow is suppression, the green is control. Here's our foliar applied pre-plant burn down. We've got Tough, we've got Bromoxynil or Partner. Here's some Certitude, that's Husky. And then our foliar applied post. So we've got some of these bromoxynils either pre or post, and then we've got lots of bromoxynil. We've got glufosinate, which is a group 10. We've got peroxysulfone. So you can see that's only those groups that I said were still going to work and where they work. And we do not have a lot of post-emergent options because there's a lot of blank space in this table out here, or we are heavily reliant on something like bromoxynil to go after kochia. So good luck. It has to be really small and you have to get good coverage. Okay, so just a quick note about kochia and Enlist, or the E3 systems. They're great systems. There's some really good varieties out there. So I think this is a really great system from a water hemp standpoint. I'm really excited about this because I think that 2,4-D is going to do a really good job on some of our water hemp issues. But with kochia, you have to be proactive versus reactive. You really need to be, you really need to be using your pre's, your pre-emergent residual, so Authority, Edge, Verax, or Zidua. Zidua can actually go on early post-emergent as well in corn and in soybeans, so that's a good thing. You can actually layer your residuals for a pre and then an early post-emergent, and then your post-emergent non-residual products. Post various combinations for first and second pass is glyphosate plus Enlist 1, Liberty, the 200 SN. Make sure you were spraying the 200 SN, not the 150. Has to be the 200 SN. You cannot take the rate of 150 and bump it up because you will do damage. There's too much surfactant in there. You can do Liberty alone. You can do a good job with that, but you got to have a ton of water. You got to do that one right using Zidua. This is how you use that Liberty. It's Liberty 200 SN at 1 liter plus 2 to 2.4 liters of AMS, that's ammonium sulfate, in 20 gallons of water. That is not negotiable. That is how you use that product. It is a contact herbicide. You have to give it every chance you can to make it work. This is what this can look like when you've sprayed kochia with something like glufosinate, and the kochia did die. You can see this burnt crispy bits in here, and it all regrew. So it's sprayed too late. In this area of the field, there is no crop competition. Even back in here where there is some soybeans, they were row crop. It was a really droughty soil. It was dry year, really light land, row crop soybeans. They were a really short variety. There is no crop competition in there until you get quite a bit further into the field, and it is a mess of kochia. And that glufosinate did work on it, but that kochia all regrew. So again, you don't want this to be happening. We don't want that. What we can do with kochia is basically some cultural management. I've showed these slides again and again. This is from Charles. This is basically a 4-year rotation, wide row, and a really light seeding rate for wheat. Year 2 is canola, year 3 is wheat, and we're here into lentils, which is not a competitive crop. And you can see this is all kochia. The sides of the plot are solid kochia. If you do things better, so in this case, still wheat, canola, wheat, lentil, but you skinny up the rows. We're on 9-inch rows now, and we've doubled the seeding rate. That's a really good heavy seeding rate. By the time you get to lentil, you just have a lot less kochia because you've done a really good job in these 3 years of taking care of it, and that's integrated weed management. So that does a really good job. Basically, you can decrease the kochia biomass by 80% and decrease the kochia seed bank by 63%. Moving on, if you could throw in some different life cycle crops. In this case, we went from spring wheat just to winter wheat. So instead of spring wheat, canola, spring wheat, and lentil. In this case, they've mowed out the edges of kochia there, but you can still see some kochia in there. When you go winter wheat, canola, winter wheat, lentil, it's a lot cleaner because this winter wheat comes up first thing in the spring. Despite the fact that kochia is a warm season weed, it is up really, really early. Most of our warm season weeds don't start coming up till middle of May kind of thing. They just need more heat. But kochia is up super early, and something like winter wheat can compete quickly. And if you could put something like a short-term perennial like alfalfa meadow brome in there, where you're cutting that crop and you're not letting that seed hit the ground, you can make a big difference in that kochia biomass. And again, we were reducing biomass by 64%, and putting alfalfa meadow brome in reduced it by 99%. So if you could make that work, that is a really good option. Now, chances that I'm going to talk about water hemp, 25% of the time, yes, and 75% of the time, also yes, I just used a different color. Because I am going to talk to you about water hemp every single chance I have to talk to you about water hemp, because it's really, really bad. Amaranthus species, they're worldwide plants. They're mostly summer annual weeds. There are some ornamentals, but I'm not too worried about those escaping and becoming a problem. Commonly called the pigweeds. They have these densely packed flowers with lots and lots and lots of seed. Usually pigmented flowers, leaves, and stems. Somewhere is in that maroon to crimson, but they can be grass green as well, but quite often there is a red color to them. 75 species worldwide, 10 of them are dioecious. That means separate male and separate female plants. And that is really important when it comes to herbicide resistance, because there's a lot of cross-pollination, there's a lot of heterogeny, which means really different looking plants, a lot of different genetics. There's still water hemp, there's still Palmer amaranth, those are both dioecious, but there's a lot of genetic diversity, and resistance grows so much faster in a dioecious population because of that. So that's not good. Red root pigweed is monoecious, but we do know that red root pigweed can accept pollen from other pigweed species, so that's not good. Water hemp, the growth rate is 50 to 70% greater than most other annual weeds. It can grow up to 1 inch a day, can get greater than 16 feet tall. It's very competitive. Some of the early studies in Ontario where it showed up in about 2014, and the average yield loss is 19%, maximum yield loss is 99%, so that's not good. And soys in Ontario, average yield loss was 43%, and the maximum yield loss was 93%. They had their first glyphosate-resistant water hemp show up in 2014, and by 2021 they have 5-way resistance. They have a real water hemp problem in some areas. It can grow really fast. This is water hemp seeds or amaranth seeds. They're really, really, really tiny, and once they get into a combine, you will just spread them all over your whole farm. There is about 44,000, almost 44,000 in that right there. There's just a lot of seed. It emerges year-long, so this is in Ontario. Again, they've been doing quite a bit of work there since it showed up about 12 years ago now. They start monitoring it, they started measuring it June 1st, and basically once a week all the way through till October, and it basically just keeps germinating all year long. Like, it just keeps coming and coming and coming and coming. So it will emerge year-round, or year-long, sorry, after the last herbicide burn down, or the herbicide burn down in no-till, and the last cultivation in conventional till, and basically the entire growing season. So this thing can emerge after harvest, after you're done harvesting, and it can still set seed by freeze-up, and you might have plants that are just like this tall, and they only have 100 seed versus like close to 1 million, but they're still bad. I mean, that's still more seed, so we don't want that. This is just to show you water hemp distribution in North Dakota, and then this is Minnesota, and I tried to show you basically, if you had them side by side. This is just, this was glyphosate-resistant water hemp, and we do know that we've had a lot of transmission up and down with floodwaters. You need to follow the water with this one. Anywhere where water has been moving, anywhere it's been flooding onto fields, when drainage ditches or ditches, field ditches are full, you need to watch those. Anywhere where water has backed up onto a field, watch those areas. That's the first place you see pigweeds, or water hemp for sure. 2019, anything in red was where we'd found it. DNA confirmation to know that we have that for sure it's water hemp and not a different pigweed, because they do all look alike. There's 2021, 2022, 2023, and 2024, and I don't have the 2025 map quite yet, but we have colored in just a couple more RMs, so we're just getting redder and redder and redder. It's really difficult to tell apart from other pigweeds when it's small. Really, really hard. The cotyledons are a little bit more egg-shaped, like they're a little bit fatter in here, and they taper versus cigar-shaped like this, but that's really hard to know unless they're side by side and you've seen millions of them like I have. When it gets bigger, it still really just looks like a pigweed. When it gets bigger yet, kind of the same thing. There's red root pigweed, there's smooth pigweed, this is water hemp in here. Sometimes it has a longer, skinnier leaf, and a darker green, but not always. It can really look like other pigweeds, and I'm not talking about Palmer amaranth today at all, but it is another one that we're watching. This is it later on. Breadroot pigweed, smooth pigweed, Powell amaranth, there's Palmer's, here's waterhemp. And this really looks like a waterhemp, really long and skinny leaves, really dark green, but it doesn't always look like that. It can very much look like any of the other pigweeds. The one thing you can tell though is hairiness. I'm not sure if you can see that well on this slide, but the redroot pigweed has lots of hairs. A lot of the other pigweeds don't. So if you have a pigweed that feels very, very smooth, and if you want to see me after, I have these little things to show you. You can feel how rough and bumpy those hairs are. The redroot pigweed is the one that is really rough and bumpy. A lot of the other pigweeds are smooth, so if it is a smooth feeling pigweed, it's not necessarily waterhemp, but you need to know if it's waterhemp or not. I guess you need to know if it's not redroot pigweed, you should be suspect. Here's a better picture of that. This is waterhemp. You can see that's a bit shiny, dark green, very, very smooth, and this is very, very rough and hairy. And then I'm just going to show you, I'm going to end this, this uplifting talk with just a bunch of pictures of waterhemp in the field. And so this is just a single waterhemp plant. You can't really see it, but it's about that wide to about that wide. These things are monsters when they do get big. They end up just and tons of seeds. This is something that can have up to 1 million seeds per plant. Most of these big plants that we see, there may be on average 300,000 seeds. I mean, that's just a really, really big number. So if I had 3 plants somewhere out here on the stage, that's 1 million seeds right there. The really, really big plants that you see could have well over 1 million if they had no plant competition. So some of the ones you see in the ditch, those ones. But generally in field, we're talking anywhere from 100,000 to 300,000 seeds on every single plant. So you cannot let this one escape, and you cannot let it go to seed, and you don't want that seed to hit the ground. So there's that one. This is an old picture that I like to use. It's one of the first ones I found right around Carmen. That's my 2022 Guide to Crop Protection. And this was late July, and there was a soybean field just right outside town, and the farmer had found this one weed. These are our boardroom tables in my office in Carmen. They are 6 foot long. That table's 6 foot long. So that's about an 8 foot tall weed. That is pretty noticeable, so you kind of can't miss that one. And there's the seed heads on it. By this point, you know that that ain't redroot pigweed. And these are not redroot pigweed type seed heads. They're long and snaky, and they have a ton of seed in them. So I haven't been back to that particular field. He's watching, and yeah, just knowing it can just show up. Here's some more. When you're looking in soybeans, lots of times you look down and you'll see some of this just kind of lurking below the canopy. That kind of looks poinsettia-like when you look at it straight down from the top. These ones definitely have those longer, skinnier leaves, but again, there's a ton of them. And if you open this canopy, there's a ton of really small ones coming too. This picture, you need to rogue this. This is just off the edge of the field. You can see the weeds just on the edge of the field here, and this is just in. I mean, that one's really noticeable. It's bright red. You can really see that one. You do not want that to go through the combine. When this thing goes through the combine, you'll just spread it everywhere. You don't want that. This next picture, there's a few in here. These are a little harder to see, but there's a green one right here, no red on it at all. There's one right here. There's another one back here. And in these fields, there was a whole strip of waterhemp along here, along the back there, because the guy had a plugged run on the seed. And anywhere where there was no seed, there was no crop, it was absolutely full of waterhemp. So there's tons of seed in this field, and it's obviously just starting to pop up. This is when you cannot ignore it. You see those plants, you have to get rid of them. Pull them out now before they set seed, get them off the field, but do not let that go to seed. Later on, this is the edge of a field near Austin, actually, so it is moving west, and that is in the field. That is probably gonna go through the combine, and when that goes through the combine, you're in for a world of hurt, because you have about probably 3 years before that thing is corner to corner on your field. The research on the stage shows when you have these herbicide-resistant weeds and do nothing about them and do nothing about these weeds, spread them around with the combine, you can be field to field waiting 3 years. Here's another one just to show this one. This one's really, really red, just showing up. And then over here in this wide row soybean, you can just see solid waterhemp up and down in the rows. Just solid, solid, solid. And then I've just got a few more pictures here. This is me in an extend field where the guy didn't spray extend until second pass, which we're not really doing that anymore anyways. If we're going to still spray extend, it's going to be early. It's either going to be pre-emerge or early post-emergent. So dicamba still kind of kicked the crap out of this thing. It didn't kill it, but you should not be spraying weeds that are almost waist high on me. And so dicamba would have worked and would have worked really well if it had been used at the proper timing on that one. But again, just to show that, yeah, that we get these calls that there's these weeds, what can I do about them? And by this stage, not much. You can try to spray, it's probably not going to work, and you can start hand weeding. This is actually soybeans, but this is solid water hemp. This was coming in from a ditch, and it was crazy. I have never seen that much. They ended up mowing out about like acres and acres and acres of this field. This is what it looks like come harvest, especially the soybeans start to die down. We get lots of sun, like these plants are just big and huge and just full of seed. Here again, this is just another shot. This is all water hemp. There is soybeans back in here, but this was crazy. And this is actually in a ditch. I normally wouldn't think that our ditches are going to be full. This is a weed that needs disturbed land. Like pigweeds just don't randomly grow in the grass. Do you know what I mean? But these ditches had been cleaned out because they flood all the time. They've been cleaned out. The culverts were reset. There's a lot of black dirt in there, and there was so much pigweed seed and so much water hemp coming from that. So just watch those ditches too, but always follow the water, because these are ditches that were flooding. They were overflowing onto the fields and taking water hemp with them. This is in wheat. When we see the wheat leaves start to die down, we get water hemp starting to grow. Just the edge of a field where you drive in at the approach, there's red root pigweed, that's water hemp. It will grow anywhere it can. Here's wheat later on, starts to poke up through the canopy, just a few plants here and there. Anywhere where there's a missed seeding in the field, like those V shapes when you come around and line up the seeder again and you don't get exactly side by side right off the hop, those are full of water hemp. And anywhere where there's just a little bit of a hole where there's not a lot of wheat, not a lot of wheat plants right there, there was water hemp. They swath this field, but below the cutter bar, there's lots of seed on here, and all of this is going to regrow. You can kind of see lines of it in here. This is going to regrow, so we already have viable seed on there, and we're going to get more seed on that yet before freeze up. So fall weed control is huge. This is the edge of a field, just a black dirt road in the south here, in the south central Manitoba. Tons of weeds, other things than water hemp, but tons of weeds. So this should all be mowed anyways. But you can see how even in oats, you start to get these plants creep into the field. Oats is usually super competitive, but in an area where you had a drowned out spot, or this is a year we were mudding in. It was really muddy at times at seeding, and so a lot of fields are mudded in, and there was a lot of poor emergence in places, and anywhere there was not oats, there was water hemp. Just a few more pictures. This is the edge of a cornfield. The Red River is just over here outside this picture. The ditch had been flooded, and lots of weeds moving in that water that was coming up the Red River. Here's another cornfield, but this one's way over by Austin area, getting close to the Austin area, and again, flooded ditch. Water comes out of the ditch. This cornfield was just polluted with water hemp. And just a few more pictures. They had mowed some roadsides here, but they hadn't mowed far enough because this is all water hemp, so that they ended up mowing this ditch corner to corner. And this one over here, who does the fence line? So in between two different crops, nobody sprayed it, nobody did anything with it, and it is solid water hemp. Somebody should be doing something about that weed. This is the edge of a field, a harvested wheat field in the back. Really didn't see any water hemp in there, but this is all water hemp. This is all taller than me, and this is goldenrod in here for size comparison. There's a ton of other weeds in here. This is red root pigweed down here, but this is all water hemp. And it is not hard to see how some of that could get in. All you need is a branch to break off or a really big wind to blow some of that seed onto that wheat field, and there will be seed in that field. This is me in a canola field close by, just the edge of a field before the ditch in the black dirt. This is one plant, that's my hand, that's how big these plants can get. You cannot pull these out, you dig them out with a shovel, you break them off, they will regrow. And then just a few feet away, all around it, are all these little baby ones, and they will have seed. Not very much, but they have seed, and that will be viable seed before harvest, or before freeze up, sorry. This is my last picture. This is just a really ugly plant, not a really tall plant, that's just my spade. We needed 2 garbage bags to get that thing out of there. That's a few feet away from the edge of this really nice clean soybean crop. There was nothing in that soybean crop, but again, that's right on the edge. That is not hard to see how that is going to get in that field in pretty short order. So what to do if you have water hemp? get it tested. So we talked about resistance testing, initial testing. The only tests I can do so far are 2, 9, and 14, and it's resistant. Most of our water hemp is resistant to most of that. Doesn't appear to be a problem in competitive crops like cereals and canola. The exception would be Roundup Ready and clearfield crops. It's a serious problem in corn, dry beans, sunflowers, and soybeans. You need to do herbicide layering to get the weeds out early when the crop is non-competitive, because your in-crop options are either limited or completely non-existent. Some advice from Ontario, where they've been dealing with it now for about 12 years. Diversify your crop rotation. So lots of diversity. Use multiple herbicide modes of action. Use tillage at strategic points in the rotation. We have to be able to use tillage. Go narrow rows where possible. Really, that's only for soybeans, but still, if you can, you should grow narrow rows. Use cover crops after winter wheat. Again, cover crops might work for us. We don't have as much of a shoulder season on either end, but that's okay. They still can work. They started going to harvest weed seed control to deal with those millions and millions and millions of seeds going through those combines. Basically, though, proactively introduce more diversity in your crop and weed management system or program. And this is just my last slide, just to plug. There is a cover crop survey. I've got some of that at the back as well. And there's a website and a QR code and all that kind of thing.
Excellent. Kim, thank you so much for that dynamic presentation. Lots of great information in there. Thank you. We have a few minutes for questions, so if anybody has a question they would like to direct at Kim, I'd be happy to run the mic to you. And just afterwards, I'll be at the back after for a bit. If anybody wants to see my little demonstration on what pigweed feels like versus red root pigweed versus water hemp, just come and see me.
Oh. So I was doing a project for school and we read one study. I can't remember who wrote it, but they said that 2 to 3 days after the water hemp is pollinated, seeds can become viable on the plant. Is that true?
I know definitely within 10 days to 2 weeks. That seems pretty fast to me, but it will have viable seed from the time of first flower to within 10 days to 2 weeks for sure. And some plants could be like that. There's a lot of diversities in that, so there might be 1 or 2 plants can be that early, other plants a bit longer. At the end of the day, it is capable of producing viable seed very, very quickly after it flowers. And it will start flowering by middle of July usually, and go all the way up until freeze up. It will be flowering. You will find flowers on those plants at freeze up. It's still trying.
Do you have a follow-up, or is that answered? Yeah. Any other questions for Kim? Oh, I barely see you, but I see you.
Yeah, I was wondering, how long can kochia and water hemp stay dormant in the soil for?
Kochia is a good one because it usually is about 2 years. Now, some work that Brian Jenks at NDSU has been doing suggests maybe a bit longer, but generally we've always assumed kochia is a really short seed bank life. So that's a really good thing. You did a really good job at getting rid of kochia in a couple of years. If you don't let any more plants go to seed, you should be able to really reduce that seed bank. Water hemp and all pigweeds, it's generally like 3 to 5 years, but some can last longer. And so if you have, with water hemp and the pigweeds in general, it's a numbers game. If you have millions and millions of seeds, and even if 99% of them are gone in 5 years and not viable, they've either grown and you haven't let that plant go back to seed, or they've degraded, 1% is still too much left over. So they both have relatively short. Kochia much shorter, and water hemp is relatively short, but it's still too many seeds left behind.
That is, I think, all the time we have for questions, unfortunately. If you do have continued questions for Kim, please go on up to the concourse. I'm sure she'd be happy to, she's like me. I like to nerd out about the things I love for extended periods of time. And I just want to say, in lieu of speaker gifts, this year Ag Days has elected to make a donation to the Manitoba Farmer Wellness Program on behalf of all of our speakers as a thank you. So thank you so much, Kim, for that wonderful presentation and all the excellent information. Join me in thanking her.